My name is Dale Rivera, and I will never forget the night betrayal struck harder than the heart attack that had just landed me in the hospital. At midnight, my daughter called, her voice cold as ice. I'm getting married tomorrow. The apartment and car are sold. Bye. Lying there with tubes in my arms, I realized the girl I had raised alone after my wife's death had been turned against me. But instead of breaking, something inside me sharpened. She thought she had taken everything, but she had no idea of the trap I had built years ago. What came next would expose not only her new husband, but a pattern of lies that destroyed lives. Before I begin, I want to ask you, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear even more powerful stories. I was still drifting in and out of restless sleep when the phone split the silence of my hospital room. The antiseptic smell clung to my nostrils, the heart monitor kept its steady rhythm, and my body ached from the aftermath of a heart attack. I reached for the receiver with trembling fingers, thinking it must be an emergency. Instead, my daughter's voice came through sharp and unrecognizable. "Dad, it's me. I'm getting married tomorrow. The apartment and car are sold. Bye." Just like that. No tenderness, no hesitation, just a cold announcement delivered in the middle of the night. The words slammed into me harder than the attack that had nearly killed me. For a moment, I thought the monitor would start screaming as my chest tightened again. This was my only child, the daughter I had sacrificed everything for after her mother died, the girl who once clung to my hand at night, afraid of storms. Now she was speaking to me like a stranger closing a business deal. I tried to steady my voice. "Married tomorrow in Las Vegas." Mary, you never said a word. And the apartment, the car. My throat felt dry as dust. Her tone was flat, practiced, as if she had rehearsed it with someone else. Leo and I decided not to wait. The apartment and car will cover the wedding and honeymoon. I'm 28, Dad. I can make my own decisions. Every word carried the stamp of someone else's hand, and I knew exactly whose. Leo, the man I had distrusted from the moment I met him. He had polished shoes, a perfect smile, and no real answers about how he earned his money. I'd practiced law for 30 years. I knew when someone was lying, and Leo lied with ease. Still, hearing Mary parrot his words cut deeper than any courtroom battle. "Leo says you've been too controlling. He says you kept me dependent. This is my chance to be independent." I closed my eyes. Independent, I had worked myself nearly to death to pay her tuition, her apartment, her car. Independent. She was selling the very gifts that had come from my sacrifices, yet there was no anger in her voice, only conviction that she had finally broken free. Something shifted inside me then. The heart patient lying in bed gave way to the strategist who had once dismantled corporate giants with clauses and contracts. I felt a grim calm rise in me. "Mary," I said softly, "I understand. But you forgot one thing." Silence filled the line. I could almost hear her frown. "What do you mean?" I let a low laugh escape my throat, surprising us both. Not the laughter of joy, but of certainty. "You'll find out soon enough. Good luck with your wedding, sweetheart." And with that, I hung up before she could reply. The monitor above me steadied. My chest no longer ached from betrayal, but from a cold determination settling into place. She thought she had taken everything from me. What she didn't know was that the apartment she had sold wasn't hers to sell, and that was only the beginning. As the line went dead, I sat staring at the ceiling of that dim hospital room, the faint beep of the heart monitor my only companion. I couldn't stop the flood of memories rushing in. 15 years had passed since cancer stole Sarah from us. Mary had been just 13, clinging to me at the funeral, whispering through sobs. "Promise me you'll never leave me, Daddy." And I had promised. I swore to her and to Sarah's fading smile that I would carry both our burdens no matter how heavy they became. From that day forward, my life stopped being about me. I was no longer the ambitious attorney who lived for depositions and court victories. I became a father who measured every success not in billable hours, but in Mary's laughter, her safety, her future. I left behind promotions I worked brutal hours, and I drained my retirement fund so she would never lack for anything. When she got into college, I remember her voice trembling with joy on the phone. "Dad, I don't know how to thank you for everything." I told her she didn't need to. "Just be happy, sweetheart. That's all the thanks I need." And when I handed her the keys to the apartment years later, she twirled around that empty living room like it was a palace. She hugged me so tightly, I thought my ribs might crack. "I can't believe this is mine," she whispered. I smiled, telling her that her mother would be so proud. But tonight, that same apartment, the one I had placed carefully into a family trust to protect her, had become a bargaining chip in Leo's scheme. She thought she had sold it to finance a Vegas wedding. In reality, she had no right to sell anything. She was a beneficiary, not the owner. That distinction, small to her, was the very safeguard that now stood between my daughter and total ruin. I thought of Leo's eyes the first night we met, how they studied me longer than any polite introduction required. He had seen my success, my resources, and perhaps even my failing health. He had smelled opportunity. And Mary, blinded by love or desperation, had opened the door wide for him. The pain in my chest that night wasn't just the residue of my heart attack. It was the shattering realization that my daughter believed the worst of me. She believed I had held her back when in truth every ounce of me had been poured into lifting her up. But instead of letting despair crush me, I felt an unfamiliar fire ignite. If Leo thought I was just a broken old man recovering in a hospital bed, he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated not only my legal training, but the promise I once made to Sarah. Protecting Mary wasn't a choice. It was my duty. I reached for the photo on the bedside table, Mary in her cap and gown beaming at graduation. She had once looked at me like I was her hero. I clenched the frame and whispered into the sterile night, "You may have forgotten who I am, Mary, but you'll remember soon enough." The following morning, I lay awake long before the nurses made their rounds. The night's conversation with Mary kept replaying in my mind, every phrase cutting deeper. "Leo says you've held me back long enough. Leo says you've been controlling. Leo says..." She didn't even hear her own voice anymore. She was reciting his. I'd spent my career listening carefully to words, weighing their meaning in courtrooms, where every slip of the tongue could alter a verdict. And I knew the difference between a daughter speaking from conviction and one repeating someone else's script. Mary's words were rehearsed, too smooth, too mechanical. Leo had coached her well. As the nurse checked my vitals, I forced myself to stay calm. Anger would only exhaust me further. What I needed wasn't outrage, it was clarity. I had always believed my training in law was a career skill, but now I understood it had been preparation for this very moment. Leo might have Mary's ear, but I had decades of experience unraveling liars. I thought back to the first dinner I shared with them at Bella Vista. Mary had been glowing, her eyes dancing as she introduced Leo. He wore confidence like a tailored suit, yet when I pressed him about his work, he dodged with slippery phrases. I help people optimize opportunities. Strategic planning. It wasn't an answer, just a performance. His Rolex had caught the candlelight, his BMW had waited outside, but his wallet came up short when the bill arrived. Every piece of him was a contradiction, and Mary had been too enamored to see it. Now she was parroting his accusations against me, too blinded to notice how he had twisted love into control, sacrifice into shackles. The daughter who once clutched my arm and begged me not to leave her was convinced I had been her jailer all along. That realization hurt worse than the betrayal itself. Still, pain has a way of sharpening resolve. I remembered Sarah's voice during those final weeks of her illness. "Promise me you'll take care of our girl. She'll need you more than ever." I had lived by that vow. I would not abandon it now, not when Leo had slithered his way into Mary's heart and pocketbook. I reached for the small notepad on the tray beside my bed and began scribbling. Not emotional outbursts, but facts. Dates, assets, legal structures, everything tied to the apartment. I reminded myself that while Mary might be temporarily lost in his web, Leo had made a critical mistake. He assumed my years of sacrifice had left me too weary to fight. He thought he had stripped me of power by winning Mary's loyalty. But he was wrong. That morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, I no longer saw myself as a helpless patient. I was the attorney who had dismantled corporate titans with a single clause, the man who had once commanded entire boardrooms with quiet precision. I had been underestimated before, and it always worked in my favor. Mary believed she was stepping into freedom with Leo. What she didn't know was that she had handed me all the proof I needed: her sudden coldness, her rehearsed words, her insistence that I was the enemy. She had confirmed what I already suspected: Leo was the true adversary. And in that sterile hospital room, I vowed I would not just expose him. I would dismantle him. By the time I was discharged 2 days later, I walked out of that hospital weaker in body but sharper in mind. The cool air hit my face as the nurse wheeled me to the curb, and I felt something stir, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Most people leave a hospital with instructions to rest. I left with a plan. At home, I set my medications on the counter, brewed myself a bitter cup of coffee, and cleared the dining room table. One by one, I laid out folders, legal pads, and a thick binder I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the documents for every major decision I'd made since Sarah's passing: trust agreements, deeds, bank records. I spread them out like evidence for a trial. The apartment sat at the center of it all. 5 years earlier, when Mary was still radiant with hope and not yet under Leo's spell, I had created a family trust. At the time, she thought I was just protecting assets in case of my death. In truth, it was more than that. It was a safeguard for her, a shield she didn't even know she had. The papers were clear: I was trustee, she was beneficiary. That meant she could live in the apartment, decorate it, even treat it like her own home. But she could never legally sell it without my written consent. I picked up the phone and called the title company to confirm what I already knew. The attempted sale Mary had boasted about would crumble the moment the buyer's lawyers discovered the defect in ownership. Escrow would be reversed, funds refunded, and Leo's payday would dissolve into thin air. For the first time since that midnight call, I felt the tightness in my chest ease. Mary thought she had slipped free from me by liquidating everything, but she hadn't just underestimated her father. She had underestimated the man who had built entire cases on tiny clauses like this one. Still, legal documents alone weren't enough. I needed to understand who exactly we were dealing with. Leo wasn't just a careless fiancé. His fingerprints were all over Mary's sudden transformation. I reached for my phone again and dialed a number etched into my memory. "Marcus, it's Dale Rivera." The line went quiet for a beat, then a chuckle. "Haven't heard that name in years." "What kind of trouble are you in, my daughter's fiancé?" "I want everything. Background, financials, relationships. Cost is no issue." Marcus Porter had worked with my firm on corporate investigations. He was relentless, discreet, and thorough. If Leo had skeletons, Marcus would find them. and I was willing to pay whatever it took. As the afternoon sun stretched across the room, I leaned back and studied the neat rows of paper covering the table. Each page represented more than ink. It was foresight's sacrifice and the quiet promise I had kept to Sarah. Mary didn't know it yet, but Leo had led her into a trap that was never meant for her. It was meant for men exactly like him. I closed the binder with a steady hand. This battle wasn't about an apartment or a car. It was about reclaiming my daughter from the grip of a predator. And for the first time in weeks, I felt my pulse steady. The game had begun, and I was no longer the patient in a hospital bed. I was the man Leo should never have underestimated. That night, my house felt heavier than it ever had before. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator carried the weight of silence. But it wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence before a storm. I sat at the dining room table, surrounded by documents, contracts, and bank statements, my war chest neatly arranged. The man who had once given up everything for family was back in his element, only this time the case wasn't corporate. It was personal. I stared at Mary's photograph propped against a folder. Her smile at graduation, so wide and full of life, now seemed like a relic from another world. How had she slipped so far so quickly into the arms of a man I knew was hollow inside? The answer was as painful as it was obvious. Leo had whispered poison into her ears until she believed it was truth. He had turned her gratitude into resentment, her trust into suspicion, and her love into defiance. But Mary's betrayal did not break me. If anything, it had sharpened me. I could almost hear Sarah's voice in my ear, "Promise me you'll take care of our girl." That promise had carried me through the darkest years of grief, and it was carrying me now. This wasn't about pride or control. It was about saving my daughter from a man who saw her not as a partner, but as a payday. I picked up the trust papers once more and studied them carefully. Every clause, every signature, every notarized stamp was a reminder of the foresight I'd had years earlier. It was almost as if I had been preparing for this moment without knowing it. The apartment wasn't lost. The sale was void. Leo thought he'd won, but in reality, he had just walked into my courtroom. And in my courtroom, liars never lasted long. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a grim smile. Leo saw me as an aging heart patient who could barely climb a set of stairs. What he didn't see was the strategist who had dismantled multi-million-dollar corporations with nothing more than a pen and a clause hidden on page 17. He thought he was clever, but clever men always left trails, and I was already following his. As midnight approached, I poured myself a glass of water, steadying my hands around it. The battle was no longer about convincing Mary of my love. She would see that in time. The battle was about dismantling Leo piece by piece until the mask slipped, and even Mary could no longer deny what he was. I raised the glass toward Sarah's photo on the mantel. "For you and for her," I whispered. The words carried a weight that settled deep in my chest. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about redemption, about keeping a promise I refused to break. And with that, I turned off the light, leaving the table set like a battlefield awaiting dawn. The war had begun, and I was ready. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The hospital gown was gone, the tubes were out, and though my chest still ached, my mind was sharper than any blade. I made my coffee black and bitter the way I used to before early morning hearings, and sat down at the dining table that had transformed into my command center. This was no longer just a father's heartbreak. It was a case, and cases were won with preparation. I dialed Marcus Porter just as the clock struck 9. Marcus was an old colleague from my law firm days, a private investigator with a reputation for digging where others wouldn't. He answered with a gruff familiarity. Dale Rivera. I figured retirement would have kept you out of trouble. Trouble found me, I replied. I need everything you can get on a man named Leo Morrison. Start with employment finances, relationships, and keep pulling until something snaps. Marcus let out a low whistle. That name already sounds slippery. You want a surface check or the full treatment? The full treatment, I said. Consider cost irrelevant. This isn't a case I can afford to lose. By noon, Marcus had already sent a preliminary report. Leo's so-called consulting business had no registered clients, no tax filings, no physical address. He lived in an apartment that cost $4,000 a month, drove a BMW under a lease teetering on default, and carried credit cards nearly maxed out. The numbers painted a picture Mary refused to see a man whose lifestyle outpaced his means. But the report dug deeper. Marcus found whispers of women, 3 of them in the past 5 years, who'd ended things abruptly with Leo. 2 had filed restraining orders that mysteriously disappeared. 1 had relocated to another state. None of their names meant anything to me yet, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Leo wasn't just a poor financial planner. He was a predator. I pushed the papers away and closed my eyes, fighting the sting of betrayal. How could Mary not see what I saw so clearly? The answer was cruel but simple. Leo hadn't targeted me. He had targeted her. He had studied her vulnerabilities, the loss of her mother, the years of relying on me, the longing to prove she was independent. He had offered her freedom while secretly plotting dependence of another kind. For a moment, I felt that old ache in my chest, but I pressed my palm flat against the table and steadied myself. No more dwelling on how I'd lost her trust. The only thing that mattered now was reclaiming it. And the way to do that was not by pleading with her, it was by exposing Leo for who he truly was. I picked up the phone again. Marcus, keep going. Find me everything. Former addresses, old employers, and if there are other victims, I want names, dates, and dollar amounts. He paused, then said quietly, You're preparing for war, aren't you? I'm not preparing, I told him. It's already begun. When Marcus's first report landed on my desk, I couldn't help but think back to the very first time I met Leo. It was at Bella Vista, Mary's favorite Italian restaurant. She had insisted on celebrating there, the same place where we'd marked her college acceptance years earlier. I remember walking through the doors that night, expecting to meet the man who had captured my daughter's heart. What I found instead was a performance so polished, it nearly blinded her. Mary sat in our usual corner booth glowing. Across from her was Leo, tall, broad-shouldered, with a smile that seemed rehearsed for mirrors rather than people. He stood when I approached, extending his hand with just enough pressure to test mine. Mr. Rivera, he said smoothly, I've heard so much about you. Please call me Leo. I nodded, noting how his eyes didn't quite match his smile. They lingered on me longer than courtesy demanded, as if he were memorizing every detail. 30 years in courtrooms had taught me to spot predators. They watched people not out of respect, but calculation. Dinner began innocently enough. Mary beamed as she spoke about her work, her plans, the future she imagined with Leo. He let her do most of the talking occasionally, chiming in with phrases that sounded borrowed from a self-help manual. I help people optimize opportunities, he said, when I asked about his work. Strategic planning, you could say. It wasn't an answer, it was smoke. His watch caught my eye, a Rolex gleaming under the candlelight. His suit was tailored, his shoes, Italian leather. Everything screamed money yet. When the waiter brought the bill for the expensive bottle of wine he'd insisted on ordering, he made the obligatory offer to pay, then relaxed a little too quickly when I reached for the check. Men with real wealth don't flinch at a dinner tab. Outside his car was parked in the lot a BMW that easily cost more than most people's yearly salary. Again, the pieces didn't fit. He had the look of success, but not the substance. And yet Mary, caught up in the glow of romance, saw only charm. I remember the drive home that night, the gnawing feeling in my gut. I wanted to warn her to shout that the man she called sweet was studying us like a chess player studies his board. But Mary had looked so happy, so certain. I told myself then that maybe I was being too cautious, too protective. I convinced myself to wait. Now, as I stared at Marcus's report, I realized my instincts had been right all along. Every inconsistency, every contradiction I had noticed at that dinner had been part of the mask Leo wore. He didn't want Mary's love. He wanted her assets. And the most painful part was that she had handed them to him willingly, convinced she was breaking free of me. I leaned back in my chair, letting the memory settle like a stone in my chest. That dinner had been my warning shot, one I ignored. But not anymore. This time I wasn't going to wait for Leo to make his move. I was going to strike first. 2 days after Marcus's report arrived, I asked Mary to meet me at a quiet cafe across town. I chose the place deliberately neutral ground, but familiar enough that she wouldn't feel ambushed. I arrived early, spreading a neat folder across the table. Years of law had taught me that documents often spoke louder than words. Mary swept in 10 minutes late, dressed in expensive clothes I knew she hadn't bought with her own salary. She carried herself with a confidence that wasn't hers. It was borrowed, a posture learned from Leo. She sat down across from me without so much as a smile. "Dad, I'm only here because I want you to stop interfering. Leo and I are married now, and you need to accept that." I let her words settle before opening the folder. "Mary, I'm not here to argue about your marriage. I'm here to talk about the apartment." Her expression hardened. "I told you it's sold. Done. We don't need to discuss it." Slowly, I turned the deed toward her, tapping my finger on a specific paragraph. "Look here. This is the trust agreement from when I bought the apartment. You're listed as the beneficiary, not the owner. That means you could live there, but you had no legal right to sell it without my consent." She leaned forward, scanning the words, her face shifting from irritation to confusion. "That can't be right. I signed papers. Money changed hands. Yes, you signed beneficiary documents," I corrected, keeping my voice calm but firm. "The buyers will discover the defect in title soon enough. The sale will collapse, and the escrow company will return the money. What Leo convinced you to do was never valid to begin with." Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed the papers back toward me. "You're lying. Leo checked everything. He said it was fine." I looked her in the eye, steady and unflinching. "Leo isn't a lawyer. He doesn't understand property law, and he certainly doesn't understand the protections I put in place. I set this trust up for one reason: to keep you safe. Safe from mistakes and safe from people like him." For the first time, I saw a crack in her certainty. Her voice softened, almost a whisper. "Then why didn't you tell me about this before?" "Because I trusted you," I answered. "I believed you would come to me before making a decision this big. I wanted you to feel independent, but not unprotected. I never imagined you'd let a man you barely knew guide you into something so reckless." Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it quickly, and I caught the name flashing across the screen, Leo. She silenced it, then looked back at me with tears brimming. "He says you've manipulated me my whole life, that this trust proves it." I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. This trust doesn't prove control, it proves protection. I didn't set this up to trap you. I set it up to protect you from being trapped by someone else. You may not believe me now, but you will. Because the man you've chosen isn't who you think he is." She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "I won't let you destroy my marriage." And with that, she stormed out, leaving the folder open between us. I gathered the papers, slowly sliding them back into place. She thought I was the enemy. But soon she'd see where the real danger lay. I sat there long after Mary stormed out, staring at the empty chair across from me. The cafe buzzed with conversation and clinking cups, but to me the world had gone silent. My daughter had looked at hard evidence and still chosen to believe the words of a man who hadn't even been in her life for a year. It wasn't just denial. It was desperation, the kind that blinds people to truth even when it's staring them in the face. I tucked the trust papers back into the folder, my hands steady despite the ache in my chest. Mary might not have realized it yet, but Leo's entire plan had already collapsed. The apartment he thought was his golden ticket had slipped through his fingers the moment he convinced her to sell something she never legally owned. To him, the deal was done, the money secured. In reality, all he had purchased was a disaster waiting to unfold. Still, I knew better than to celebrate early. Men like Leo never fold quietly. When cornered, they lash out, clawing for control, even as the ground beneath them crumbles. Mary's blind loyalty gave him cover, at least for now. But soon, very soon, he would feel the walls closing in. I walked out into the sunlight, breathing in the salt air from the bay. Each step was slower than it used to be, but every step carried resolve. I thought of Sarah again, her hand in mine during those final weeks, her voice urging me to protect our daughter. It wasn't protection Mary wanted, now she thought it was control. But the truth was simpler. I wasn't fighting her. I was fighting for her. That night, I sat at my dining room table with Marcus on the phone, papers spread like a battlefield before me. "She doesn't see it yet," I told him, my voice low. "But the sale was void from the start. The buyers will discover it, demand their money back, and Leo will be left with nothing." Marcus grunted. "That'll rattle him. A guy like that doesn't operate without a payoff." "Exactly," I said. "He's been playing for a payday, and now it's gone." "The question is, what does a man like Leo do when the rug is pulled out from under him?" "Depends," Marcus replied. "But desperation makes people dangerous." I hung up and stared at the stack of documents again. For years I had thought of these papers as dull necessities, estate planning meant to satisfy lawyers and banks. Tonight, they felt like armor. Every clause, every signature was a shield that had held even when my daughter turned against me. Mary didn't see it yet, but the man she had chosen had already lost. He just didn't know it. And when he finally realized his payday had evaporated, that was when his mask would crack. That was when the predator beneath the polish would show himself. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. The fight was far from over. But for the first time since that midnight call in the hospital, I knew one thing for certain: Leo Morrison's victory had ended before it even began. 3 nights later, Mary called me. Her voice was tight, defensive, the way it always was now when Leo's shadow hovered over her. "Dad, Leo says you're lying. He says you're twisting the truth to keep control of me. He's even spoken to a lawyer who agrees the apartment was mine to sell." I listened quietly, letting her words run their course. When she paused, I asked the only question that mattered. "Mary, has Leo shown you any paperwork, business contracts, tax returns, deeds, anything that proves what he says?" Silence. Then a quick, "That's none of your business." "It's every bit my business," I answered firmly. "You think I'm fighting to control you? No, sweetheart. I'm fighting to save you." The difference matters. Her breath caught. For a moment I thought I'd reached her, but then she said, "I won't let you destroy my marriage," and hung up. I sat in the darkened living room, the receiver still warm in my hand. Her loyalty was still chained to him, no matter how many cracks I'd revealed. That was the danger of men like Leo. They knew how to bind people with words stronger than steel. Logic meant little against the intoxicating mix of charm and fear he poured into her. But I also knew something Leo didn't. The game was slipping from his hands. His payday had evaporated the moment Mary tried to sell that apartment. The escrow company would reverse everything, and soon he'd be staring at creditors pounding on his door. His BMW repossessed, his rent past due. And when a man like Leo runs out of money, he runs out of masks. I called Marcus that night. "He's getting desperate," I told him. "Mary can't see it, but the pressure's mounting." Marcus didn't hesitate. Desperate men are sloppy men. That's when they make mistakes. Keep pressing. We'll find what we need. I poured myself another cup of coffee even though it was near midnight. The caffeine wasn't for energy. It was for ritual, a reminder of who I had been for decades. A man who lived in the fine print, who found strength not in fists, but in facts. Leo had underestimated that. As I stared at Sarah's photo on the mantel, I whispered, "She'll see the truth, I promise." It wasn't a vow of vengeance. It was a vow of clarity that one day soon Mary would look at Leo and see not her rescuer, but her captor. For now I had to endure her anger, her accusations, her blind faith in a fraud. That was the cost of patience. But when the collapse came, and it would, I would be ready with evidence in hand, waiting to show her everything she needed to see. And as I turned off the light that night, I felt the tension coil tighter in my chest. The apartment had slipped through Leo's fingers, and I knew it was only a matter of time before his desperation boiled over. The storm was coming. The letter arrived on heavy cream-colored paper, the kind meant to impress. The return address was a law office I had never heard of. I slid it open with the same calm precision I'd used to open hundreds of legal briefs in my career. Inside, bold words leapt off the page: demand for immediate cessation of elder abuse and fraudulent property claims. I read it twice then, a third time, each pass slower than the last. According to this so-called attorney, I was manipulating my daughter, forcing her into dependency, and fraudulently claiming ownership of an apartment that rightfully belonged to her. The letter demanded I cease all interference, produce proof of ownership, and release control of the trust immediately, or face legal consequences. For a moment, I almost laughed. The grammar was sloppy, the citations non-existent, the legal theory thinner than tissue paper. It was the kind of letter a desperate man commissions when his back is against the wall. Still, I knew better than to dismiss it outright. Men like Leo thrived on smoke and mirrors, and this letter was his first attempt to turn smoke into fire. That evening, I called Richard Maxwell, my former law partner. Richard had reviewed my trust work years ago and always admired my meticulous attention to detail. "Richard, I need your eyes on something," I said, faxing him the letter. He called back within 10 minutes, chuckling. "Dale, this reads like it was written by someone who got their law degree from a cereal box. Elder abuse, manipulation. You created that trust 5 years ago while in full capacity represented by counsel. It's airtight. They don't have a leg to stand on." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "So I shouldn't waste sleep over it, waste postage," maybe, Richard quipped. "This isn't about winning a case, Dale. It's about intimidation. He wants to rattle you, make Mary believe you're the aggressor. He's not fighting in court. He's fighting in her mind." Those words stayed with me long after we hung up. Leo wasn't trying to defeat me legally. He was trying to rewrite the story for Mary to make me the villain in her eyes. And that was a battle evidence alone couldn't win. The next day, Mary called. Her tone was clipped, rehearsed, almost identical to the words in that letter. Dad, Leo's lawyer says you've been manipulating me, that you used the trust to keep control over my life. He says this is elder abuse. I closed my eyes. The strategy was working. Leo had handed her a script, and she was reading it line by line. Mary, I said gently, did you even read the trust documents yourself, or are you just taking his word? She bristled. Of course I read them. No, sweetheart, I replied, steady as stone. If you had, you'd know the difference between beneficiary and ownership. You're not lying to me. You're lying to yourself because it's easier than facing the truth about Leo. Her silence cut through the line. Then almost in a whisper, she said, You're trying to ruin my marriage before hanging up. I set the phone down slowly. The first shots of Leo's counterattack had been fired. He thought paper threats and twisted words could weaken me. But he had underestimated one thing: I had lived my entire life in courtrooms. And in courtrooms, truth always outlasts theatrics. Marcus called me late one evening, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had seen too much. Dale, I've got more on your Leo Morrison, he said without preamble, and you're not going to like it. I sat straighter in my chair, legal pads and trust documents still spread before me like pieces of a puzzle. Tell me everything. He exhaled, slow and heavy. I traced his employment claims. That consulting business doesn't exist. Not even as a shell company. No license, no tax filings, no business address. He's been living on charm and other people's wallets. But that's only the start. I dug into his personal history. This guy's a pattern predator. The word predator froze the air in my lungs. How many? I asked quietly. 5 women in 8 years, Marcus replied. 2 filed restraining orders later withdrawn under suspicious circumstances. 3 reported missing funds, unauthorized charges, or vanished savings. One of them, a financial advisor, lost nearly $200,000 before he walked out. Another, a real estate agent, lost her rental property. Both cases were settled quietly, no criminal charges, but the trail is there. I gripped the edge of my chair. The pieces I'd been holding in my mind, the expensive suits, the too perfect smile, the sudden influence over Mary, clicked into place. Leo wasn't improvising. He was running the same con over and over. Do any of them want to talk? I asked. Marcus hesitated. 2 have agreed already. Amanda Porter, the advisor, and Jennifer Walsh, the realtor. They're bitter, yes, but more than that, they want him stopped. I'll put you in contact if you're ready. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling as memories of Mary's childhood swept over me. Her small hand clutching mine at the park, her beaming face when she learned to ride her bike the way she had once whispered, Daddy, you'll always protect me. And now here she was, standing on the edge of the same cliff that had swallowed other women whole. Set it up, I told Marcus. The sooner the better. He cleared his throat. There's one more thing. His finances are in freefall. Credit cards maxed, BMW lease about to be repossessed 3 months behind on rent. He needed that apartment sale like oxygen. You cut off his air supply? That should have given me satisfaction, but instead it made my pulse quicken. A desperate man is more dangerous than a rich one. Leo had no money left, but he still had Mary, and through her he had a shield. After we hung up, I stared at the rows of documents on my dining room table. They were strong, airtight, but they were paper. Paper couldn't protect Mary from the psychological hold Leo had wrapped around her. He had turned her love into a weapon against me. For the first time in weeks, fear not for myself, but for her gnawed at my insides. This wasn't just about saving assets or proving a legal point. This was about saving my daughter from becoming his next casualty. I picked up the phone and called Richard, my old partner. "Richard, I need to move faster. This isn't just fraud. It's a pattern. If we don't act soon, Mary will be another name on his list." And as I hung up, a chilling thought settled over me. Leo wasn't finished hunting. He had simply chosen his next victim, and her name was Mary Rivera. The chapel smelled of wilted roses and cheap perfume, the kind of place that traded in quick promises and quicker regrets. I slipped into the back pew unnoticed, the manila folder tucked under my arm like a weapon. 20 guests filled the small room, most of them Leo's acquaintances, business associates, who probably knew little of his true nature. At the front, Mary stood in a white dress, her eyes fixed on Leo as though he were her savior. The officiant cleared his throat. "If anyone has reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever. Hold your peace." My pulse steadied. This was my moment. I rose from the pew and said firmly, "I do." Every head in the chapel turned. Gasps rippled through the room as Leo's smile faltered. His eyes locked on mine, and I saw the mask crack for the first time. "This is a private ceremony," he snapped. "You weren't invited." "No," I said, walking slowly down the aisle, folder in hand. "But my daughter is the bride, and she deserves to know the truth before she signs her life away." Mary's face flushed red, a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "Dad, not here. Not now. Please." I stopped at the altar, setting the folder on the table beside the Bible. "Mary, did Leo ever tell you about Amanda Porter?" I pulled out the first marriage certificate and slid it across. "He married her in 2018. She lost nearly $200,000 before he disappeared." Mary shook her head violently. "That's fake. Leo told me he'd never been married." Leo lunged for the document, but I slapped my hand down over it. Calmly, I pulled out a second certificate. "And what about Jennifer Walsh, married to him in 2020? She lost her home, her savings, everything. Sound familiar?" The guests leaned closer, whispers spreading like wildfire. Mary's bouquet trembled in her hands. "Leo, you said I was your first serious relationship since college. Mary, don't listen to him." Leo said, his charm cracking under pressure. "He's manipulating you. This is about control." But I wasn't finished. I laid out financial records, timelines, and sworn statements from both women. He used the same words with them that he used with you. Promises of a future talk, of building together, then sudden requests for money. Look at the statements. Look at the pattern. He's not marrying you, Mary. He's investing in his next victim. The officiant stepped back, clearly uncomfortable. The guests murmured louder, some moving toward the exits. Leo's business associates didn't want to be connected to a scandal. Mary stared at the documents, her lips trembling as she read the words aloud. He said the same things, word for word. Her eyes darted to Leo. "Tell me this isn't true." Leo reached for her arm, his voice sharp now. "We can talk about this later. Don't let him destroy what we have." She jerked away, eyes brimming with tears. "What we have, you told me I was your first love." Were they lies too? For the first time, Leo's mask slipped completely. They meant nothing. "You mean everything." But the room had already turned against him. The evidence lay scattered across the altar like a prosecutor's case, and my daughter, still in her wedding dress, was no longer a bride. She was a woman standing on the edge of revelation. The chapel confrontation had rattled Leo, but men like him don't vanish after one public humiliation. They retreat, regroup, and come back with sharper weapons. Within a week, the first of those weapons landed in my mailbox, a legal motion filed by none other than Daniel Reeves of Morrison & Associates. Reeves wasn't some back alley amateur. He was a seasoned defense attorney with a reputation for dismantling fraud cases on technicalities. I sat at my dining room table, the thick stack of paperwork spread before me. Reeves wasn't attacking Leo's character. He was attacking me. His motion claimed selective prosecution, arguing that Leo was being unfairly targeted because of my influence as a retired attorney with decades of connections. He demanded access to my communications with law enforcement, suggesting I had orchestrated a vendetta disguised as justice. When I finished reading, I called Richard Maxwell. He answered on the second ring. "Dale, I've seen Reeves pull this stunt before. He thrives on shifting focus from his client to the accuser. And in this case, you're a perfect target." "Because I have history," I said flatly. "Because you have power." Richard corrected. "Judges know your name. Prosecutors respect you. Reeves will frame this as you using your influence to crush a man who simply married your daughter." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it settling over me. For the first time, I realized I had walked into Leo's trap. While I had been building a case in the courtroom, Leo had been building a case in Mary's mind. And sure enough, the call came that evening. Dad Mary's voice trembled, but not with anger, with confusion. "Leo told me you're using your old law connections to destroy him. He says you've paid women to lie. That's why all this evidence looks the same, because you made it up." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "Sweetheart, those women came forward because they lived the same nightmare you're living. I didn't pay them. I didn't have to." "Leo's pattern speaks for itself," she sniffled. "But why does it all feel so coordinated? Leo says you've always wanted to control me, and now you're trying to control my marriage." Her words pierced deeper than any legal motion could. Reeves's strategy was working not in the courtroom, but in the fragile bond between father and daughter. "Mary, listen to me," I said, my voice low and steady. "Control is telling someone what they can't do. Protection is making sure they don't lose everything when they stumble. What I've done, every clause in that trust, every precaution, it wasn't for me. It was for you." She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her words broke me. "Dad, I need space. Please stop calling me for a while." The line went dead. I set the phone down gently, though my hands shook. Reeves had done more damage in one motion than Leo had in months. He had reframed the narrative so completely that Mary no longer saw a father fighting for her. She saw a man waging war out of spite. And as I sat in the silence of my home, surrounded by evidence that suddenly felt like ash, I realized the bitter truth: Leo hadn't just hired a lawyer. He had bought himself time, and with time he could tighten his hold on Mary. The days that followed felt heavier than the weeks I'd spent in the hospital. The house was quiet, yet my mind was anything but. Every corner held reminders of Mary's life, her piano still standing in the living room, the framed photographs lining the hallway, the graduation gown tucked away in a closet. I used to see those things as trophies of sacrifice, evidence of a father's love. Now they felt like exhibits in a case I was losing. Mary's words echoed every time I tried to rest. "Dad, I need space." I had spent years giving her room to grow, never once letting her see how much it cost me to do it alone. And yet now, the very act of trying to protect her had become the proof of control in her eyes. That was Leo's genius. He didn't have to destroy me with evidence, he only had to convince her that my love was a cage. I kept working, of course. My dining table was still a battlefield covered in trust documents, Marcus's reports, and the sworn statements from Amanda and Jennifer. I read them over and over, not because I doubted their truth, but because I feared Mary never would believe them. The courtroom wasn't the only place where truth mattered. It had to matter to her, and right now it didn't. Marcus called late one night. Dale Reeves has been filing procedural motions, dragging things out. They're stalling for time. My gut says Leo's working on her hard. I pinched the bridge of my nose. He doesn't need months. He only needs her to believe one thing, that I'm the enemy. That's his playbook. Marcus agreed. Charm the victim, isolate her from family, then rewrite the past until the only version she trusts is his. After the call, I sat in the dim light of my office, staring at Sarah's photograph on my desk. "I'm losing her," I whispered. It wasn't the kind of admission I'd ever allowed in a courtroom, but this wasn't a courtroom. This was my life unraveling in front of me. The next afternoon, Mary stopped by. She didn't come inside. She stood on the porch like a visitor. Her arms were crossed, her eyes guarded. "Dad, I meant what I said. Please stop digging into Leo. Please stop contacting me." I tried to keep my voice calm. "Mary, I can't do that. Not when I see you heading toward the same cliff he's pushed others off." Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand. Leo makes me feel like I can finally breathe. With you, it's always rules, always conditions. With him, I'm free. Free." The word stung more than any insult. She saw shackles where I had built safety nets. She saw chains where I had built walls to keep predators out. She shook her head, turned, and walked away. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, tail lights fading into the dusk. For the first time since this began, I felt the crushing weight of defeat. But as the night settled, I reminded myself of one truth I had lived by my whole career: cases are not won in a single hearing. They are won in persistence, in patience, in the relentless pursuit of truth. Mary might believe she needed space, but I knew time was running out. And if Leo thought my silence meant surrender, he was about to learn otherwise. Saturday morning found me sitting in a downtown coffee shop, waiting for a woman I had never met, but who held the key to saving my daughter. The cafe was busy with weekend chatter, but I sat in the corner back to the wall, habitually studying every entrance. The manila folder lay in front of me, filled with Marcus's reports and the fragile hope that truth still mattered. At precisely 10 o'clock, she arrived. Tall, composed, dressed in a navy blazer that spoke of someone who had rebuilt her life piece by piece. Jennifer Walsh introduced herself with a firm handshake. Her eyes sharp, intelligent, the kind of eyes that once would have lit up when Leo whispered his promises. "Mr. Rivera," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I've been waiting years for someone to finally ask about Leo Morrison." "Call me Dale," I replied. "And thank you for coming. I know this can't be easy." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Easy was the day I signed my divorce papers. Everything before that was ruin." She opened her leather portfolio, neatly organized with bank statements, emails, even copies of legal filings. "Leo is methodical. He studies his targets. Successful women, financially comfortable but emotionally vulnerable. That's his type." I listened as she described the stages of his scheme. Stage 1, win sympathy. "He told me his ex-wife had destroyed him financially," Jennifer explained. "Made me feel like I was rescuing him." Stage 2, joint accounts. Stage 3, the urgent business opportunity that always seemed just around the corner. I transferred over $250,000 before I realized he wasn't planning a future with me, he was appraising my assets. Her voice hardened. When I confronted him, he turned it around. Made me feel guilty for not trusting him. That's his greatest skill, making victims believe the crime is their fault. Every word she spoke felt like an echo of what I'd seen with Mary. The same phrases, the same manipulation, the same suffocating charm. I thought of my daughter standing in that wedding dress, repeating his lines as if they were her own. The parallels were almost unbearable. "Jennifer," I asked quietly, "are you willing to testify, to stand with me not just in court, but in front of my daughter. She met my gaze without hesitation. I've been ready for 3 years. Just tell me when and where. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: hope. Leo had taken so much from these women, but he had also left behind a trail too consistent to ignore. A trail that, if followed, could lead Mary back to the truth. As we parted ways, Jennifer touched my arm lightly. "Mr. Rivera, don't blame yourself. Leo's victims are intelligent, capable women. He doesn't steal their money first, he steals their judgment." Her words stayed with me as I walked back to my car. Mary wasn't weak. She wasn't blind. She was simply trapped in a web spun by a master manipulator. And now, with Jennifer's testimony in hand, I finally had a thread strong enough to tear that web apart. That afternoon, Jennifer kept her promise. She placed a call, and within an hour I found myself sitting across from Amanda Porter in the same cafe. Amanda was older than Jennifer, perhaps, in her mid-40s, with tired eyes that carried the weight of someone who had lost more than money. She introduced herself with a quiet dignity, but her voice trembled slightly when she began. "I lost everything to him," she said, folding her hands together on the table. "My savings, my house, even my confidence. For a long time I thought it was my fault." Her words hit me like a punch. They could have been Mary's in another year if I didn't act. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Amanda, I need to understand how he operated with you. Every detail matters," she nodded. "It always starts the same. He presents himself as broken but brilliant. With me, he claimed his ex had drained him financially, but he was rebuilding. He made me feel like I was part of his comeback story. He was charming, attentive, protective until I began questioning where the money was going." Amanda slid a folder across the table. Inside were her bank records transfers that added up to nearly $180,000. He told me it was temporary, that an investment would pay off, that we'd be secure. By the time I realized he was siphoning my future, he had already planned his exit. One morning he was gone, phone disconnected, accounts closed, apartment empty. I felt my stomach tighten. "How long did it take from the moment you met him to the day he left?" 18 months, she replied bitterly. Jennifer said the same thing, didn't she? It's his timeline. Enough time to build trust, drain accounts, then vanish before the law can catch up. 18 months. Mary had been with him for 8. My daughter was standing at the halfway mark of his playbook, believing she was building a life, when in reality, she was a target on a clock. Amanda's gaze softened when she saw my expression. "Mr. Rivera, he's going to try to disappear soon. If he feels pressure, if the money isn't coming in, he'll cut ties and run. That's how he survives." The words chilled me. Marcus had already warned me Leo's finances were collapsing. The apartment sale had failed. That meant Leo's usual 18-month cycle might accelerate. Days, maybe weeks, not months. I closed the folder and met Amanda's eyes. "Would you be willing to tell my daughter this yourself, to show her what he did to you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "If it saves her from what I went through, yes. I'll testify. I'll speak. I'll do whatever it takes." As she left, I sat alone for a while, her warning echoing in my ears. Leo wasn't just manipulating Mary, he was running out of time. And a desperate predator is the most dangerous kind. I gathered Jennifer's and Amanda's folders together, holding them like lifelines. For the first time, I had allies who understood exactly what Mary couldn't yet see. The evidence was mounting, the timeline closing in. And I knew the next move would determine everything. By Sunday morning, my dining room table looked less like a home and more like a courtroom. Jennifer's statements, Amanda's bank records, Marcus's surveillance notes, all of it lay spread in careful order. Each piece was a shard of glass sharp on its own, but together they formed a weapon strong enough to cut through Leo's lies. Marcus arrived just after 8, a folder tucked under his arm. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Dale, I've got enough here to rattle cages. The question is, are you ready to go to law enforcement?" I gestured to the table. "We have a pattern. We have 2 victims willing to testify. We have financial records, timelines, and sworn statements. If this doesn't build a case, nothing will." He opened his folder and laid down photographs, grainy shots of Leo outside Mary's apartment, suitcase in hand, speaking with a man I didn't recognize. "He's preparing to move. Cash withdrawals from his account suggest he's consolidating. If we don't act now, he'll vanish like he did before." The urgency in Marcus's voice ignited something in me. For weeks I had been on the defensive, reacting to Leo's moves, trying to counter his poison in Mary's mind. But now I had the chance to go on offense. At 10 o'clock sharp, we walked into the district attorney's office. Richard Maxwell met us there, his tie perfectly knotted, his briefcase heavy with documents. "We've got a strong pattern case," he told the assistant DA. 2 witnesses with matching stories, financial evidence, and an ongoing attempt with his current victim. You add in the trust documents, and you've got fraud, conspiracy, maybe even attempted bigamy. The assistant DA flipped through the files, her brows rising higher with each page. Finally, she closed the folder with a decisive snap. "We'll open a case, but we'll need an arrest warrant first." "Can you put your witnesses in front of a judge by tomorrow?" Richard promised. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tide shifting. This wasn't just me against Leo anymore. It was me, Marcus, Richard, Jennifer, Amanda, and soon the full weight of the law. That night, Marcus called again. "Leo's agitated. He tried to visit Mary twice today, lingering around her building. Neighbors say he asked about her schedule. He knows something's wrong." I gripped the phone tighter. "That makes him dangerous. We need to move faster." "Then be ready," Marcus said. "When the warrant comes through, it'll be quick. Police don't want him slipping away." After we hung up, I sat alone in the quiet, the evidence spread before me like a map. Every path led to the same conclusion: Leo Morrison was running out of time. And so was I. I looked at Sarah's picture on the mantel, her smile frozen in, a moment before illness stole her. "I'm close," I whispered. "Closer than ever. Just hold on for me, Mary. Hold on until the truth breaks through." The storm I had been bracing for was finally on the horizon. And this time I wasn't waiting for it, I was walking straight into it. Monday morning broke with a tension I could feel in my bones. I hadn't slept much the night before, pacing between the dining room table and the window, waiting for a call that would change everything. At 9:15, the phone rang. It was Richard. "The warrant's approved. Fraud, theft, conspiracy. Porter and Walsh are lined up to testify. It's time." By 10:30, I was standing outside Mary's apartment complex, the spring air cool against my face. Marcus pulled up with 2 uniformed officers, his expression grim but steady. "You sure you want to be here?" he asked. I nodded. "If he's going down, my daughter needs to see it with her own eyes." We climbed the narrow stairwell, each step heavier than the last. My heart pounded not from weakness, but from anticipation. Marcus knocked firmly. For a moment there was silence. Then the door creaked open, and Mary's face appeared. She looked startled, then wary. "Dad, what's going on?" Before I could answer, Leo stepped into view, already dressed, a suitcase half hidden behind him. His smile was tight-forced. "What is this?" Detective Porter stepped forward. "Leo Morrison, you're under arrest for fraud in the first-degree theft and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." Leo's face drained of color. "This is a mistake," he snapped, but his voice cracked. "Mary, don't believe them. They're lying." Your father is behind this. The officers moved quickly, handcuffing him as he struggled. Mary, he shouted, twisting against their grip. They planted this evidence he's controlling you just like always. Mary looked at me, confusion clouding her eyes. I didn't argue. Instead, I opened the manila folder I carried and laid its contents on her kitchen table: marriage certificates, bank records, sworn statements from Jennifer and Amanda. Read them, Mary, I said softly. Read what he's done before. Jennifer herself stepped into the apartment, then her presence calm but commanding. She held out her own documents, her own scars. Mary, I was where you are. He told me I was his only love. He drained my accounts, then vanished. He said the exact same words to me that he said to you. Mary's hands shook as she picked up the pages. Her lips moved silently as she read, her bouquet of denial withering with every line. Finally, she whispered, Leo, is this true? Leo's mask shattered. His voice rose to a desperate shout. They're all liars. He paid them. Don't you see, Mary? This is exactly what he wanted. He's stealing you from me. But the evidence was undeniable. The officers led him toward the door, his protests growing weaker as reality pressed in. Mary's tears fell freely, now splashing onto the documents spread before her. She looked at me, eyes wide with horror. Dad, what have I done? I stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. You believed in someone who didn't deserve it. That isn't your crime, it's his. And now he's finally facing justice. As the door shut behind Leo, silence filled the apartment. For the first time in months, I saw my daughter without the shadow of his lies hanging over her. After the door closed and the sound of footsteps faded down the stairwell, Mary collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table. Her hands covered her face, shoulders shaking with sobs. The documents lay scattered in front of her, a cruel reflection of the man she thought she loved. I stood quietly for a moment, letting her cry. She needed to feel the weight of it before she could let it go. Finally, I pulled out a chair beside her and sat down. Mary, I said softly, you don't have to carry this shame. He's the one who deceived you, not the other way around. She lifted her head, mascara streaked down her cheeks, eyes red and swollen. Dad, I was so blind. You warned me. You showed me the truth, and I chose him anyway. How can you ever forgive me? I reached across the table and took her trembling hand in mine. Because you're my daughter. And because love doesn't stop when someone stumbles, it gets stronger. Sarah asked me to protect you. I promised her I would. That promise doesn't end because you made a mistake. Her lips quivered. But I said such awful things to you. I told you that you were controlling, that you ruined everything. I believed him over you. I squeezed her hand gently. You believed him because he was skilled at lies. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Jennifer, Amanda, they're smart, capable women. He fooled them too. You're not alone in this. She pressed her forehead against my arm, her voice muffled. I feel so stupid. No, I said firmly. Stupid is refusing to see the truth when it's laid out in front of you. And that's not what you did just now. You looked at the evidence, you saw his pattern, and you faced it. That takes courage. The room grew quiet except for her uneven breaths. Outside, the San Diego sun streamed through the blinds, painting the kitchen in golden light. It felt almost symbolic, like the darkness that had clung to us for months was finally breaking. After a while, she straightened, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. What happens now? She asked, her voice steadier. Now, I said, Leo faces the law. He'll have his day in court, but this time with witnesses and evidence stacked against him. The mask won't save him. And you. I paused, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You start healing. Therapy rebuilding trust and remembering who you are without his voice in your ear. She nodded slowly, determination flickering in her eyes. I want that. I want to feel like myself again. I smiled, a rare and genuine smile that I hadn't felt in months. And you will. We'll do it together. In that moment, sitting side by side at her kitchen table, I felt the bond between us repairing itself. Not instantly, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to believe that the scars left by Leo's deception would one day fade, leaving behind something stronger than before. For the first time in a long time, my daughter was truly back. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized Leo never truly stole money. His real theft was trust. He built illusions so carefully that even intelligent, capable women believed him. My daughter wasn't foolish. She was targeted. And I wasn't controlling, I was a father trying to honor a promise I made to his late mother. When betrayal comes from strangers, it wounds. But when it seeps into your family through manipulation, it cuts deeper than any blade. I learned that protecting loved ones sometimes means standing firm even when they see you as the enemy. Love isn't about being liked in the moment. It's about safeguarding those who cannot see the danger right in front of them. To parents watching this, I say, do not give up on your children even when they push you away. And to children, remember sometimes the boundaries your parents set aren't cages but shields built from years of sacrifice. Leo will face the justice he deserves, but the greater victory is that Mary and I found our way back to each other. Healing takes time, but the bond between a parent and child, once tested and restored, is stronger than any deception. Now I want to ask you, have you ever lived through a betrayal like this, where truth and lies tore your family apart? How did you handle it, and what did you learn? Share your story in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for listening.